Hi, everybody. Welcome to finally another episode of the Driven Podcast, where we're going to be sharing stories that are inspiring and uplifting to remind you of your true potential, so you can live that driven life. And today, I have my guest. Today is Erin Brooke. Erin is a lawyer,
Don't hold it against me.
but you're also the nicest person I know. So I'm super excited to share Erin today here with you guys. And if you have any questions, please drop in the comments, and I'll be
For
able
sure.
to ask you that as well.
Wonderful.
So Erin, why don't you share with me first and foremost when I put it out there that I was going to be filming an episode, a podcast.
Yeah.
You out of everybody, you out of 200 people, literally came to me and said, "So when are you doing it?"
Absolutely. So I think when someone puts that out there that they want to do something, and if you're willing to participate, you have to hold them to it. Because if not, it's just putting it out there and everyone's saying, yeah, sure, in theory, that sounds like a great idea.
Right.
But in order to hold you accountable to actually do it, someone's got to come in and say, hey, let's get this going.
When it's happening.
When are we doing it?
Yeah, and that's how this whole thing was brought back to my attention. There's been a few episodes of the Driven Podcast, but I haven't done one in a long time. And I just love that you walked right up to me and I said, you know what, it is happening. It has to happen, because I had already committed to it. And I said, do you want to be my first guest? And you were like, sure.
Yeah, and we put it right in the calendar right then.
Literally right then and there.
Yeah.
Now, as a lawyer, how do you end up deciding to become a lawyer? Like, walk me back to that time when you were making that decision.
Well, that's a really funny story, actually. I didn't want to be a lawyer originally. I wanted to be a doctor. But my brother was playing floor hockey, and he fell on a stick, and he cut his lip. And we had to go to the hospital, and he had to get stitches. And it dawned on me at that moment that being a doctor meant you had to deal with some pretty gross stuff.
Right.
So I decided at that time that I was going to shift gears from medicine to law. So that would have been around grade 5 for me when that happened. And after that, I just found a passion for argument. My mother would say that may really early in my life.
I may know a few people that you may have a future in
exactly.
lawyering.
And then I went on to high school and I did the debate team. Super cool. And from there, it just found into a passion into law. And I studied in my undergraduate degree at VIU. I did liberal studies and philosophy. And then went on to law school.
Wow. Was it like in the movies where you are like sitting at a table, dark, like one light, and like piles of books?
Well, no, I had more light than that, but definitely piles of books. I mean, the amount of work that law school was enormous. And the shift even from doing an undergraduate degree to going to law school, it was a lot. So for me, that was an adjustment. That was the first time I'd lived away from home. So I had moved all the way to Calgary to go to law school, left my family here, and started out basically on what I would call my first grown-up life, having to, pay bills by myself, buy groceries, manage my own home life, as well as manage the education piece. And because I don't come from an independently wealthy family, I had to work while I was in school.
I was just going to ask you, how did you pay for that?
So I got student loans, I got lines of credit, as well as working full-time while going to law school.
Wow. What job did you have?
I worked at the mall. So in Nanaimo, I worked at Cotton Ginny back in the day when we still had one of those. And they have a sister store called Tabby, which is for sometimes a little more older demographic. So I did end up getting half price off a lot of sweaters with cats on the front. And it was really cute and fun. But that's where I worked while I was in school. So I worked the night shifts at the mall. And I did that while I was in law school.
That is crazy. It's always impressive when someone, just the amount of work that must come with law school, and you still have the bandwidth to take on a job and basically save that money for you to do it on your own.
And it was a challenge. And I went right from high school. So I went to John Barsby High School in Nanaimo. Then I went up to VIU. So I went right through, no breaks, and then right into law school. So I was a lawyer before I turned 25 years old. Yeah.
That's crazy.
So I've been doing it for 12 years now.
We just did the math.
Yeah, just do the math. Just do the math.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, now what would you say? My knowledge of lawyers is it only extends. I've been very blessed because the few lawyers that I know are all really nice people and really easy to talk to and everything. Yeah. But that was not my idea of lawyers back when.
It's still not
in
my
general.
idea of lawyers.
Oh, yeah?
So I find that because we are in such a high conflict profession and everything is so competitive, I mean, even in law school, the people you're sitting side by side with and are supposed to be friends with are the same people you're competing for jobs with. So the competition starts right at the beginning. And I think it depends on sort of the area you practice in. There can be sort of this idea, and I think that maybe some lawyers come from it where they're maybe better than other people and have that sort of idea that because they have higher education that somehow makes them elevated.
Right.
I don't share that
Like
belief.
a doctor?
Yeah, and I don't share that belief. I don't think just because you have a certain degree or job makes you better. I can't fix my own toilet. So my plumber to me is my most important person sometimes.
Yep, because you can be the president of the USA and
you still can't do some of the most basic things.
Yeah.
And I think about it, where would we be without our sanitation workers, the people that pick up the garbage? And where would we be without the people that do every single job in our community? And I'm just one of those people. My area of expertise just happens to be law.
That is insane. I remember one day. So before I did this, before Driven, I worked at sales in Shaw Cable, and it was on the phones, and sometimes people would be great, and sometimes not so much. But I remember one time, one customer just kept repeating his name to me, but he would not say his name without saying first doctor. My name is Doctor whatever, and I'm surprised that I never got in trouble for this. I just kept asking, your name, like your actual name is Doctor? like the profession, and he was so mad. But I was like, calm down. Like, I understand.
Yeah. And I think for some people that can be a real sense of pride too. Like they've earned the title. And I think, I mean, I would
But how
never
is
go
that
like
different than I pushed a child out of my vagina? Like
exactly. Then mother. Then
that's right.
And I think that every
creator
job is
of life.
Yeah. Right.
Come on.
Exactly.
I would rather both become a lawyer and a doctor before I had to push a child out of somewhere.
Me too. So I don't have any kids,
right,
obviously,
obviously,
from that statement. But I mean, my mother was a stay-at-home mom. She worked from home and ran a daycare from our home when we were kids so that she could be there for us when we were little. That was a benefit they had at the time. I mean, obviously times were different when I was a kid than they are now with the cost of living. But my dad and my mom have always worked blue-collar jobs, so I didn't come from a highly educated family. And my parents, I guess, sort of always expected that, we would just get jobs like they did and go on with our lives. And so I have one younger brother. He's 2 years younger than I am, and he's an engineer. And I went on to become a lawyer. And, our parents were like, well, good for you guys.
Yeah.
But, there were no RRSPs. There was no savings.
Right.
There was no setup for us for that. So we always had to kind of work for what we got in that. And I think it made us humble, and it made us understand that money doesn't grow on trees. It's not something you take for granted, and that education is a privilege, and that the opportunity to go and be educated isn't something that's available to everyone. Not everyone has the same support system with their family for that, or the same ability to do those things. And so we really appreciated that we were able to go and get an education, and we never took that for granted. So I mean, I wouldn't ever, if calling me Lawyer Brooke was a thing, I wouldn't want people to do it.
That'd be weird.
Because I think being a lawyer,
just think it's odd.
It's one of the least interesting things I think about a person. Is
are
the
you
job
kidding?
They do.
Have you watched Suits?
Yeah, so Suits is not real.
What?
No, maybe the hours. They're always at work really late.
Yeah.
Maybe the hours.
But they're drinking. That's pretty cool. They're always drinking.
We don't drink at work.
Now, what do you think about this? This may be a bit of a controversial touch on how the times have changed. But nowadays, someone could say it's a lot harder for anybody to go and get a job where they can afford to live with that job. Now, do you think that it is a matter of something that we need to fix as a society, that is where things are going, or do you just see it as a natural evolution of society?
Well, and I think that's kind of a multifaceted question. I think for a lot of it, part of us, we choose what we suffer for.
Right.
So for me, I don't own a house because I opted to go to school and pay for that with student loans. So I don't have a mortgage. I've mortgaged my life with my education.
Yeah.
I also opted to open a firm of my own instead of work for someone else.
Right.
So every choice I've made has a consequence that leads to what my financial outcome can be. So no, I'm not a homeowner and I can't enter into the housing market because I've made other sort of decisions. When people say education isn't accessible, I always say, well, I didn't have any money going into school and I worked minimum wage jobs to get there. So I pushed French fries at a drive-through window to get my undergraduate degree while selling jewelry at the mall and selling t-shirts at the mall and having 3 part-time jobs to do my undergrad. So I just say you have to choose what you're willing to suffer for to make it happen. And it's not always easy. And that can sound really self-righteous. Well, anyone can do it. But really, I think if you really, really, really want something, you're on the path to having it and you're going to make it happen. It's just finding that thing that you really, really want and are willing to suffer for.
Yeah, they say that life changes when your wants become musts. When it's not a matter of, oh, this would be nice. It would be nice to own a home, or it would be nice to have an education, or it'd be nice to, when it's a matter of survival, you find a way.
Yeah, or a complete passion and desire.
Yeah, well, because, and that to me is a matter of survival. Now, given that I haven't had a traditional job for 7 years, 8 years, the idea of having a job, that would be the death of me. I would suffocate. I couldn't do it.
Exactly. And I say the same thing about working for someone else now, having been my own boss. I don't know that I could easily adapt to
I told my son
to someone else's rules.
That's right. And it's, and like you say, you choose what you suffer for, because it often, probably most of the time, it means that you're working 60, 80 hours a week. And not 40.
How often are you in here mopping floors? Because I know I'm in my office mopping floors on weekends and doing those little other things that just go into the background of running a business. It's not all glory. And I think people often assume that. They look at a life and go, oh, well, how privileged you are to have that, which is true. I'm really privileged to have everything I have. But it's also a lot of work to maintain that. And I think some people just don't want to put in the work. And I mean, that comes down to your health, your mental health, your education. And if you really, really want it, there's people out there that can support you to do it, and to just reach out and find them, because there's people out there and they're wanting to share and help and mentor. And I think that's a piece that a lot of people forget, is that people who've gone through it, they want to help and they want to share their stories and help other people.
Yeah, 100%, because you understand that somebody else succeeding is not taking anything away from you.
No, what's the story? A candle can light a million other candles and never lose its flame.
Yeah. That's awesome. So now you come back to live in Nanaimo.
I do, yeah.
And what would you say, like just off the top of your mind, what would you say have been the maybe 2 or 3 defining moments for you that have helped you become the Brook that you are today?
Yeah, so I think for me, one was actually going away and going to law school and actually like taking that on. So a lot of people were naysayers. They're like, oh, it's really hard to get into law school. It's really challenging to do that. Maybe you should have a backup plan. I never had a backup plan. So for me, that was, I have to succeed at this. So I bawled my eyes out the day I got my acceptance letter, because honestly, I mean, I had a Bachelor of Arts degree in liberal studies and philosophy, which is great, but that's not a direct transferable job. So I would have had to then learn how to sell that degree to do some other form of work if I hadn't gotten into law school. So getting in was a big defining moment for me. It was a big step. It was, okay, now I'm going to go and do this for real. And now I have to do it. And I'm embarking on something that is going to be the rest of my life. Let's hope I made the right decision.
Oh my goodness. That's,
I'm going to be $100,000 in debt. Let's make sure we like this job. So one of the other defining moments for me was deciding to do student legal assistance, which is a volunteer organization through the University of Calgary, where law students actually take on conduct of legal files. So they're obviously less serious. We're not running murder trials or anything, but a little bit less serious files. And we actually get the opportunity to have conduct of a file, meet with clients, run small trials, and actually experience what it's like to practice law. So for me, it really, that was very important for me to actually see what the job was going to be like before I took it on as a career.
Does anybody that start studying law go through that, where they have the opportunity to get an idea of what it's like to?
Well, and I think this is something that a lot of people have the wrong idea. They watch Perry Mason or they watch Suits or I'm dating
Suits
myself.
is the only.
But I mean, it's not Ally McBeal. That's not what law looks like in real life.
Right.
So I think for people to actually see and to experience what law is, they either need to go and shadow a lawyer in a law firm, or they need to actually experience one of these programs. And a lot of universities that have law schools have a similar program. So I'm actually going back for the 40th anniversary of our student legal assistance program for a gala at the end of October. So I'm really excited to go for that.
Yeah.
But for me, that was a really big turning point for me to realize that I actually do like that aspect of the job. So some people take law as an academic pursuit and end up doing more of advisory or educational or academic perspectives. I actually wanted to practice law. So that's a bit of a shift. In law school, you really learn the law, how to understand the law and how to interpret and apply it.
Yeah, because you
but
read
you don't learn
one
to
of
be
those.
A lawyer.
You read a paragraph and you're like, "What?"
Yeah.
And you have to read it 5 times.
Well, it's in a different language.
Yeah.
Right? So for me, that's like reading the manual for the VCR. Like, I mean, I can't figure that out either. So again, like, VCR.
VCR, yeah, Brooke, come on.
So.
All right, now, was it like, what was it that inspired you to become a lawyer, or was it like? Yeah, what was it?
Well, I always had this sort of an advocate perspective. Like, I always wanted to support the underdog, help the person that couldn't speak for themselves. I was always that person challenging authority when I thought what they were saying was inappropriate. Yeah. Sorry to some of my high school teachers for that. But, you know, whenever I felt that there was something unfair or unjust, or that people needed a leader or someone to speak for them, that was definitely a role I naturally fell into. It fit with my personality. So law was a natural flow from that. And I think how I came into family law, which is what I practice primarily now, was kind of a roundabout way. I never actually wanted to practice family law.
Because that's the divorces and
children's
custody, right,
spousal support, and like dividing up everything, the property. So it can be really contentious. And I said, I'm not touching that. I mean, they call it pink ghetto law because more women lawyers practice in that area typically than men. And it didn't have a lot of allure to me in law school. I thought I would do criminal law or corporate law, something like that. So I went and I articled, which is we have to do like a practicum year after law school, where we work under a supervising lawyer to actually learn how to be lawyers. Right. And then we write the bar exam. So I did that in Alberta. And
Mike got into, never mind.
Yeah, Mike didn't go to law school. I know. So I did go to law school and I did article and I passed the bar in Alberta and I worked at a general practice firm and I did a little bit of family law, but it was mostly other areas, real estate, wills and estates, personal injury, sort of general litigation. And then I got the opportunity to take a drug prosecution contract. So I moved to Chilliwack, actually from Alberta, from Calgary to Chilliwack. And for 2 years I did drug prosecutions.
What does that mean?
So that means I was an agent for the Public Prosecution Service of Canada, so for the federal crown. So in Canada, we have division of our court cases, and drugs fall under the federal purview rather than the provincial purview. Right. So I was acting as an agent for federal crown in doing prosecutions for people who are selling, trafficking, and cultivating drugs.
Like Narcos.
Yeah.
All my references are Netflix references.
I know, I'm noticing this. I'm not a big cable guy. So
I've never watched an episode of Narcos, but everybody's like, oh my God, it's amazing.
Yeah, so basically it was prosecuting people who are selling drugs, trafficking in drugs. Yeah. So yeah, so I did that.
It has to be a difficult job.
Yeah.
Like it has to be, I mean, you're sitting across the table with people and no matter which side of the, you know, whether you're the defense or the, it's got to be hard.
I mean, the level of files I was doing as a younger, more junior lawyer weren't really high level. These were people who quite often were drug addicts who unfortunately were roped into having to sell drugs to pay for their drugs, who might have been caught up in sort of an otherwise unfortunate environment. Right. So for me, I actually found it really hard to do because the people that we were actually catching aren't the ones that are responsible for it. Right. So not at the level I was doing. So I actually found that kind of hard. And I always think that you have to treat everyone with dignity and integrity and respect. And
does this happen to you where, I mean, one of the things, literally when you start your, so I went to university for accounting and finance, but when I did my personal training certification, the first thing that you read in the book is basically how you need to be extremely professional, and you should never, let your clients contact you or anything like that outside of the working times or
Yeah.
what have you, and you need to be like, there's the line
Yeah.
and whatever, right? And basically telling you that you can't become friends with your clients, because that blurs the line.
Yeah.
And what I found very early on was that it was extremely difficult to do that.
Right.
When you're playing such an important role in someone's lives, I mean, it's really difficult to not feel those heartstrings sometimes. How do you deal with that?
So for me, in practicing family law, and this is coming back to like law school, my family law professor actually said to me, she's like, "You're going to practice family law," and I said, "No, I'm not."
Yeah.
She says, "I bet you dinner and drinks," and I was like, "Oh, well, all right." And then I ended up at a family law conference, and she was there presenting. She's now a judge, and she said to me, "What's a criminal lawyer doing at a family law conference?" And I went, "Buying you dinner."
Yeah.
So it ended up being that I fell into it because of that, because I do have that ability to connect with other people. And one of the things when you're dealing with family law specifically, we're not dealing with a file. This isn't a business transaction. These are people's lives, their families, their children, their entire life savings, what they've invested all of their emotional energy into for a considerable amount of time. So if you can't maintain a professional relationship where I can give you legal advice and suggest to you what is in your best interest and advocate for you, but I still have to have that level of compassion and connection. And quite often, people are vulnerable when they come in, and you have to be open and accepting of that and be able to handle that. And I think that's what makes me good at my job in part, is that I can really understand and be empathetic with the people that are coming into my office and help them achieve the best outcome for them, which is, it's catered to their family, and it's quite specific, and sometimes we have to think outside the box.
Well, and I bet dealing with the emotions, because emotions can be high, and so someone can be there, and if they're mad, if they want to retaliate, they may want to do things, and you can understand where they're coming from, but at the same time, you have to be like, well,
and I'm also a very expensive friend to have.
Right.
Like, you don't want to come into my office and just cry at me, because that's going to cost you quite a bit. So there's also that mitigation factor where I have to say to you, yes, you're right. You are entitled to this, but what is it going to cost you emotionally, literally, in order to get what you were entitled to?
Totally.
So I think in family law, there's a lot more work that has to happen that's outside of just applying the law black and white to humans. It's saying, what actually matters to you and what's the best outcome for your family, and let's solve this problem together. So I think that's sort of my job.
If you were to not be a lawyer, what do you think you'd do?
Oh, I would decorate cakes.
What?
Absolutely. I love fondant decorating cakes. It's one of my little hobbies.
Do you do? Yeah, you practice it?
Yeah.
When, like, how does this? Where do you learn to do this?
Where did that come up? So my mother used to make the most beautiful cakes with the piping bags and the little stars all over them. And as she got older, she got arthritis in her hands really bad, and her hands were always very hot from the arthritis, so she'd melt the icing. And I don't have the attention span to do that, like, little sort of like detailed work. So we decided we would try fondant, because we saw it on one of those, like, Buddy the Cake Guy. We saw one of those shows on TV. So we thought we'd just go and try it, and we ended up having a fun time doing that. So then I kind of just sort of kept on going with that. And I'm not really good, but if I was going to switch jobs, and probably doing something like that would be awesome, right?
Have you ever? I mean, of course, not every industry needs to go there, but with technology nowadays, do you find? Do you ever think of what life would look like if there was always a camera on you through your meetings with clients, through the actual?
I think people would be horrified, honestly, if they saw, like, how devastating family breakdowns are and how hard that is for people. And
maybe they would think about it twice before they go on.
I always joke that divorce should be free, but marriage should cost $50,000. And then you've prepaid for your divorce, really and then divorce is free. I think that what it is that people, I think the reasons relationships break down come down to communication and expectations. And if I had to summarize it, that's everyone who comes into my office. They have different expectations, they don't communicate, and they didn't communicate what their expectations were. And I think that leads to a lot of people's heartache, and it leads to a lot of a lot of hurt, a lot of resentment, and that just carries over. And unfortunately, it can impact kids. So
That's
our
what I was
goal
going to
is
say.
to
That's
protect
the
the kids in
biggest.
it.
That's the biggest issue, right?
Yeah.
That somebody else ends up paying for the.
And I always tell my clients, don't call your ex-spouse your ex, call them your co-parent if you have children, because you have an ongoing relationship with that person that you need to maintain so that your kids don't have to pick who comes to their wedding. And often I'll say that when we're talking about 2 and 3-year-old children, we're like, okay, well, what does their wedding look like? Are you both there?
Nice.
Are you both invited?
Yeah.
Let's focus on that. Let's talk about the future and not focus on our own. Looking through, and this isn't mine, I've stolen it from a number of judges, but the windshield of a car is bigger than the rearview mirror for a reason.
Right. You got to look forward and not back.
Yeah. So that's one of the focuses that we have in our job, is to also say, look, you've got to look past your current pain to your future peace, and let's try and find that.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And tell me this: is it every lawyer's sort of ultimate goal to be a judge?
No, there's actually a lot of lawyers that don't have any aspirations to be judges. I think being a judge is a really hard job.
Right.
That's sort of the next level. You
versus
then have
the
to,
easy peasy
every day of what we do.
Yeah.
I mean, no, and I mean, for me, I would like that responsibility. I think I call it a responsibility.
Right.
And that's the next stage of our job, is how do you then take the next step into problem solving? Because lawyers, we try and sit together with each other and our clients and solve the problem. And we go in front of an adjudicator when we can't get them to an agreement, or we can't get them to a settlement. And then the judge has to do the really hard work, because if the two lawyers who've been practicing law a long time and understand the law, if we can't solve it, there's probably something really substantial or really difficult there. So that's sort of leveling up. And we always joke that in our profession, unlike most sports, where the most qualified get benched, because that's what we call getting put on the bench.
Right.
So, yeah, so for us, it's definitely the most experienced and the most skilled and the best problem solvers, communicators, the most respected members of the profession. So for me, if I ever got to be a judge, that would be a huge honor, because it would mean that I was respected by all of my colleagues and my peers to say, look, this person we trust to be that one to solve the problems.
Yeah, holy, that's, like you said, that's a lot of responsibility.
And it is, and a lot of respect comes with that. So it's not for everyone, but I think it would be a great honor to get
responsibility is a good thing, you know. The more you, at least in my experience, when I only cared about me, when I only cared about making me happy, my life's quality was down here. And it was only, or gradually, as I started looking past myself and pursuing a goal that impacted people around me. And to the point where sometimes you're like, you know what, yeah, this is going to be more work than I've done so far, but is the mission worth it? Yes, perfect. Because of that sense of responsibility, right? It feels like.
And if you don't stretch your own capacity, then you never know what you're capable of. So I always tell people that if you're feeling like really overwhelmed and scared to take that next step, it's probably time to do it, because you've reached this nice comfort zone that you have to step out of. So for me, that became, let's open my own firm and let's go out and do that. Let's be the boss and let's take that step, because when I realized I was pushing against that boundary like a balloon about to pop, it was like, okay, I need a bigger balloon. I need to move into that next stage.
Now, you said that you didn't come from a family with money and all that. At least the default expectation of a lawyer is, wow, you must be pretty well off. Does that
No.
What I was gonna ask is like, it is like family, like, do you find families like,
oh no,
Brooke's a lawyer, so
my family's not like that. So
nice.
If anything, like my brother, he's an engineer, so he does well for himself. He's gone on to do well, and we all live comfortably. Like, we are middle class, all of us, like happy, stable. We have everything we need, but we were also raised to be charitable. So my mom always said, if people have less than you, it's on you to share what you have and to help with that. So I've always been raised with sort of a charitable aspect to my life, giving of your time. If you don't have money, like, give what you can. So that's why I'm always like really actively involved in volunteering, and it's part that's crossed into my profession. So I not only practice family law, but I volunteer with the Canadian Bar Association. Locally, I'm the chair of our family law section, and then I also sit on the national family law section, and I'm on their executive now.
Oh wow!
So I'll be working my way up. Someday I will be the chair of that section. So
The chair. That
The
sounds
chair.
so cool.
Very
When somebody
important.
asks, like, Miguel, what's your position? I never know what to say.
You should say
What the
president.
president
President of driven
of
performance.
me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just say chair.
Just chair.
Well, I mean
You're the chair
CEO.
of the
That
committee,
little
yeah?
well, chief,
Oh, I
chief
like
or
it.
chair.
Chief
I don't know.
Executive Officer. I like it.
Let's see if there's any comments here and
Alrighty.
see if you guys have any questions. It's a little warm in here. I don't know if you can feel that. All right. I don't think we have any questions. Awesome. So now, what do you like? You exercise and you work out, and
I didn't always.
you didn't always.
No.
All right. So tell me, how did you end up working out?
So for me, law school was a real kick in the pants. So I was working, going to school, didn't have a lot of money, so I was eating quite poorly,
Right.
and didn't really have the time to commit to myself and my own like health and wellness.
Right.
So it wasn't until I was in to my second to last year of law school, like between second and third year, that I really realized I hadn't been taking care of myself.
Right.
And I thought, okay, I've got to start curtailing this, because I'd put on that freshman 15 every year of school for like 5 years. So it was starting to really add up. I was always a heavy kid, so it was starting to pack on, and then I wasn't feeling good, and I wasn't able to keep up with all the things I wanted to do, the work, the volunteering, the articling,
Right.
everything like that. And I thought, no, I've got to start taking a little bit better care of myself. Ended up switching jobs to do that crown job, and then it was a whole new set of learning curve, again, right off the rails. So for me, it was always putting myself last in the priority list. But I realized I can't do the whole priority list if I'm not taking care of myself.
Right.
So that's where I came around full circle. It turns out I'm a diabetic, and they'd misdiagnosed me for the longest time. They accused you of being type 2 if you're heavy. So they were having me on medication, telling me diet, exercise, diet, exercise. So I was doing the diet, and I was doing the exercise. I was at Curves. That was the gym that I chose to work with at the time. It fit with sort of my capabilities. I weighed 420 pounds at my heaviest.
Holy smokes.
So actually probably higher than that was the heaviest my scale weighed. So it was probably more than that. But
wow, Brooke.
yeah, so for me, I had to really start to take care of myself and dial it back in. So in 2010, that's when I really started to have the ability. That's when I moved back to Nanaimo, and I'd moved back here because that Crown contract had finished. And my mom needed to have her hips replaced. And I thought, well, it'd be a good time for me to come and assist with the family and come back to where my family all was and home in Nanaimo.
Yeah.
So I got a job at a firm that did family law. So that's how I transitioned back into doing family practice. And they did other things, but I ended up really finding that that was sort of my niche. And I started taking better care of myself and getting my weight under control, which,
what does life look like at 420 pounds? Like what's the main thing that you remember struggling with?
Finding clothes. Honestly, finding clothes and being tired. So to do a flight of stairs carrying, because when you're a Crown, you have Rubbermaid bins full of files. So I'm carrying these huge bins of files and myself upstairs. And I'm thinking like, my knees are sore. I'm tired. I can't get clothes. Like, this is all really frustrating. And I would just, it was sort of defeating, and you don't have the energy that you wish you had to do all the things you want to do. I still did them because I was young, and I think it was my youth that compensated for the lack of energy. But honestly, I think it was just, I wanted to do so many more things, and I wanted to be so much more engaged in the community and get involved with charity groups. And I just couldn't do all of that when I was so tired at the end of the day. And also with my blood sugar levels being all out of balance and everything, I was extra tired. And so for me, it was really just wanting to prolong my life, because I could see that I couldn't sustain that forever. And literally carrying around that much extra weight imagine it.
Well,
imagine wearing a weight vest and carrying it.
Yeah.
So I was healthy aside from having diabetes. I had good cholesterol, my heart was fine, everything was fine, but I'm like, that doesn't stay forever. So there is the health concern. I definitely didn't want to lose weight for like just image issues. Like, I've never had a real vanity piece. My mother was a bigger woman, so I was never raised with that sort of vanity piece behind it. But I mean, that's a part of it. You can't live in a world in a super plus size body without having, people make negative comments when you're flying, for example. Right? No one wants to sit next to you on the plane. So those kind of things all made it really awkward. Or dating is also extra difficult. The older you get, if you're heavier, that's like 2 strikes against you, especially for women. So I think that's a piece of it.
I think even if you just, even just your own existence, just like you say, going upstairs,
Yeah.
Like everything is more
It's harder.
uncomfortable.
So you choose what you suffer for.
Right.
So
again.
for me, again, that comes back to that statement. Like, yeah, I can have a hard time hauling my own arse up the stairs, or I can have a hard time going to the gym and working out. So for me,
And what was your first experience? Like, so you go to Curves. What does it look like? What's the workouts like?
So Curves is a circuit system, and there are circuit machines, so that everything helps to control it. And they count your reps.
Nice.
And at the time, they just got the new machines that lit up with like how hard you were working.
All right.
So it had some feedback for you right on there, and I found that that was a good environment for me. A lot of the women I was working out around and with were also really heavy or very old. So I mean, you didn't feel like
out of place, and
and like I've gone into other gyms where some of the women have their full face of makeup on and they've got like the perfect bodies and they're like running on the treadmills and you're like, oh great, like getting onto the elliptical is enough of a workout for me right now.
I got up.
All right, I've done 2. I'm good.
Yeah.
But I think for me it was a good experience. It was a great way. So I lost 100 pounds at that point on my own.
Did you also learn like how to eat when you were there?
So that was part of the diabetes education. Was I went to see the nutritionist with the Diabetes Education Center, and so that was really good. And about eating, I had the knowledge.
Right.
I know.
We all know broccoli is better than Timbits.
Yeah, and I always joke like when everyone asks how do you do it, I'm like, well, my diet is if it tastes good, spit it out.
That's so sad.
But it's so sad because now I know that there's a lot of really healthy things and alternatives and adaptations for things that you love and moderation. So that was something too. And I think when you're that heavy, your mental health also takes the toll. Like you're tired and every day is a battle in some way or another that you might not realize. So
every day is a battle no matter what.
Well, yeah. So you just add that. I call it layers. So when I think about the weight, I add it as one layer of difficulty to my life that every time you shed, it's a substantial amount of weight. Like I lost 175 and then gained back with the introduction of insulin with the proper diagnosis of some late onset type 1 diabetes. Right. So my pancreas does not make enough insulin and it's slowly dying. And I also don't use insulin properly. So I have insulin resistance as well as not making enough of it. So I'm like a 1.5 diabetic. So having met with an endocrinologist, getting proper medication, learning about where the medications work in my body. Are they muscle processed? Are they liver processed? Do they work on the brain? Where do they work? And learning about the medications I'm taking helps me also cater the food that I eat with them and the exercise that I do. Right. So then I realized that what was working about Curves was the mix of cardio and strength training, which is something that I always look for in ongoing workouts. And so when Curves closed, that was a challenge.
But so then you lost, so you started at 420 and you lost 175?
About 175, but I gained back. So I'm sitting at lost 127 is what I've lost. So I'm still got a long way to go. So that puts me in the high 200s right now, which I mean, I like being out of the 3s, let's be honest, right? So, I mean, I've always been really open about what my weight is because I am still heavy. Yeah.
And plus, so what?
Yeah. So we do weighted squats, and I'm like, I'm already squatting 100 pounds more than you guys.
Yeah,
like,
that's not fair.
It's not fair. Yeah. But at the same time, I never felt sorry for myself.
Oh.
And I never blamed anyone else for my position that I was in.
Oh, shit. All right. Let's talk about this because life is all about perspective. And we can all feel, that life's kicking us and sometimes that is what it feels, but there's always someone that has it way worse.
Absolutely.
How did you know not to put yourself in that victim situation?
So my mom's favorite thing when we were kids, well, for me anyway, she was a little softer with my baby brother, but for me, my mom would say, tears are a waste of salt.
I would like to meet your mom.
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
And she would say, what is crying about it going to solve?
Wow.
Those were her 2 statements that she would ask us.
Are you the oldest?
I'm the oldest. There's 2 of us. I'm the oldest. And my mom was a tough lady. Like she was,
tough love.
Well, not just tough love, accountability.
Ownership of your own.
You made a choice. There's a consequence for every decision, positive or negative. So every time you make a choice, you are balancing that, whether you think of it consciously or not. Every choice it could go this way or it can go this way. Yeah. So when I'm sitting there with the diagnosis of being diabetic, being, what do they call it, super morbidly obese was the technical diagnosis. Wow. And sitting there thinking, well, look, I've still got 40 years of a career that's a high stress job, right? So I can either let that stress continue to be a reason that I'm overeating, not exercising, or I can say, well, maybe I treat my stress with healthier eating, with healthier exercise. And I did a lot of reading, I read a lot of books, and I just did it. And the same way, my mom also said, if you can read, you can do anything. And so, I think that there's some truth to that. There's some skill required.
Well, and now it's even, the barrier of entry is even less, because if you can just watch YouTube,
yeah,
you don't even need to know how to read, and you can learn.
Yeah. And so, like, when the gym that I was going to before closed, I didn't find a new gym because I do have workout equipment at home. And you always find an excuse not to do it when there's not that accountability piece to someone else. And I find that breaking promises to myself was always something that was easier to do. I would never do it to someone else.
Right.
But it's so much easier to break a promise to yourself.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, no, I've got to go back into a gym. And my mom passed away in January of a sudden heart attack. Wow. So that for me was a bit of a wake-up call. My mom was 63 years old. She had a lot of health complications and was on a lot of medications that contributed to that. But for me, it was like, okay, I don't have that many more years, but I want to spend them doing the things that I love doing.
Yeah.
And, I want to be able to do all those things. I want to get on a plane without someone giving me stink eye.
Yeah.
Right? Because they might have to sit next to you.
Without you being like, fuck, I can't fit.
Well, everyone's uncomfortable on planes,
Fair
let's
enough.
be honest. But I mean, I think it's
You know what I just realized? Now, so back in the day, or at least when I remember, they would charge you extra for the seats at the very front, like the super nice seats.
Yeah.
Now, I just booked some flights for the States. And they charge you extra for the seats on the aisle.
Yeah, because there's more leg room.
I was like, you.
It's so terrible. I think for me, all of it, the charging extra seats for people who are obese too, that's a whole ethics piece. And so
is that a thing too?
It is a thing. So there's a lot of issues with having to buy 2 seats, the ethics of that, the booking of it, flying as a fat person, all of these other things. So the advocate part of me has always been big on body positivity, acceptance, non-discrimination. So that aspect of my personality that attributes to my legal career also was then impacted by like my personal physical state, because I live in a fat body.
Right.
I mean, I do. Every day I have to function in the world. I have to try and buy clothes. I have to try and get suits. I have to do all of these things, go to work, buy cars. For some people who are heavy, that's an extra challenge.
Right.
And so being what I call super overweight or extra overweight is an added challenge. So when you go into a gym and people look at you, they'll also say things like, oh, I'm really proud of you for doing this, which is so patronizing and condescending. Because at that point, I probably already lost 75 pounds.
Right.
And people are like, oh, it's so good you're starting this journey. Yeah. And in some ways, you're like, thanks.
Like,
I don't really need your approval or your consideration. So actually, a friend of mine said something really nice to me the other day. I was like, yeah, I want to be fit by 40. And he's like, you're already pretty fit. And I was like, that's a fantastic thing to say. Yeah. Because, I mean, my legs can probably do a whole lot more than another woman who's 37 years old, just because
who has never had to lift. Yeah, that's right.
To deadlift 400 pounds to get out of a chair, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, the weight that I was carrying, I'm actually quite strong. And I think I took a terrible fall when I was in my articling year. And the doctor actually said if I hadn't have been heavy, I probably would have died, because my arm was so big that my head didn't crack the pavement when I fell. Goodness. So there's just little things that, you look back, you're like, well, maybe it was a blessing. Maybe it happened for a reason. Maybe it was a coping mechanism. Maybe it was a result of stress. Maybe it was just not self-care. It doesn't matter. None of it matters. What matters is what you're going to do now and what your focus is now and what do you want to do. I don't want to run marathons. That's not ever going to be my goal. Yeah. But, I would like to be able to go to any store in the mall and buy clothes. Right. Like, I think that would be really awesome instead of being restricted to shopping.
To just not even think about
one small section or in 2 specialized stores. So I think for me, those are the kind of things that are what I call the non-scale goals. Yeah. Also health. I mean, I'm working really well. I've got an amazing endocrinologist now. My health is on track. Nice. My blood sugars are on track. Nice. I've got no problems with my cholesterol. My heart's great. Yeah. So all of those other assumptions that people have about people who are heavy aren't accurate. You can't tell if someone's healthy by looking at them. And, you can have really, really thin people who are really unhealthy.
100%.
And then when they do get sick, they blame the world for it.
Yeah. I think that health, like the state of our body and our bodies themselves, there's such a minuscule portion of who we are. It's just like the car that you drive.
Absolutely.
And if you derive your sense of self, your sense of pride, your sense of worth from the car that you drive, it's exactly the same as you deriving that sense of self or worth from your body.
And what's so interesting about that, though, Miguel, is if you think about society, we do that. We do it with people's cars. We do it with whether you own a house. And we tell you to do it with your body. And I saw a really great thing on the internet that said, if there is an advertisement or something that's making you feel bad about yourself, ask you who makes money from that feeling.
Right.
And like, oh, you know what? Yeah, I'm 37 years old. I've got wrinkles. It's going to happen. Bangs before Botox.
Yeah.
Like, that's just who we are.
Yeah.
We're human beings and we're going to age and our bodies are going to change and we're not all going to look like airbrushed celebrities. And I think so much of our life we're told to be these catalog versions of humans that don't actually exist, even in the real world.
Yeah. And I think that we get lost, and only in the absence of your self-awareness can then that garbage get in your mind. And yes, there is a lot of negativity out there and a lot of people that can be the norm.
Right.
But there's a saying that I won't even try because I'll just butcher it. But a ship doesn't sink, and it's because it doesn't let water in, right? And I think that's extremely important. If you base your sense of worth of from, for example, from someone telling you that you are beautiful, you've given them the power. Absolutely. And when inevitably our exterior appearance completely fades away, you're going to suffer. And why would you put yourself in a position where that's going to happen? A friend of mine was super excited because he bought a beautiful car that he absolutely loves, right? And I'm happy for him, but it's not like, it doesn't make me like him anymore or any less. I don't think he's any cooler.
And I don't know what kind of car you drive.
You go. Like who?
So it's so ironic that society puts a lot of that on people, and it starts at a really young age. Yeah. And Katie Wilcox, if you ever watch her, she's got "Healthy is the new skinny" has been her motto. So she was a model, and she just basically went into a more health focus rather than thinness focus. Right. Which I think a lot of people, when we talk about weight loss, we have to be really careful because people are talking about thinness, not health, a lot of the time. And so I catch that more often with women, but it definitely happens with men, that they're talking about they want to be thin. Right. And I think, well, quite honestly, the least interesting thing about me is what I look like. I mean, my fascination with Halloween, way bigger.
But yes, right? I saw way that. Your profile picture is like,
yeah, I did
you're
a big
ready.
Sugar skull. Yeah, that was for a gala, actually, for the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation.
So do you actually dress up?
Oh, every year, yeah, at work.
Okay, this may just be what we needed to hear because Katie and
I know we're wife, bonding over our love of Halloween online.
So there's no children other than Max and the family, and my son who's 12, so he's already kind of too cool for it, kind of
getting there.
But we all dress up, and we go out with Max, and and we love it, and I don't think that'll ever stop because
no, it can't. Like I took my friends' kids out trick or treating last year, and I keep telling my brother and his wife I'm going to steal their baby and take her trick or treating. She's 9 months old now, so
cute.
So she's really cute. But I think if you've got a passion for it and you've got something that you love, I mean, that's what makes you interesting. It's those elements of other people that are what make them interesting to be around, and it's got nothing to do with the size of their jeans or the car they drive or the job they do or the title they have.
It is so liberating to acknowledge that, and what I found is that regardless of whether 98% of the population out there looks at my car and goes like, it will not.
I'll tell you that my car gets me from A to B just the same as a Porsche does, just for a lot less.
Yeah,
it's not a Porsche.
I used to before. I mean, I have a Corolla now, and before it, I had a car that I was so proud of because it was literally falling apart.
Duct tape holding it together,
basically. And I just remember being like, when I had to make the decision to trade it was when I was like, this is now a matter of safety.
Yeah.
I almost spun out. Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
maybe it's time.
Yeah.
But
And I drive my cars until I kill them, until
right.
it's more expensive to
That's
fix
kind
them
of
than to get a
of
new one.
me.
Just
Yeah.
because I don't identify any self-worth with objects, except for perhaps my books.
Yeah.
I read a lot, and I have a
But
lot
books
of
are
books.
like stories, like trips, like those are
Well,
experiences.
yeah, and I joke about this with people, but every book I've read gives me an experience that I wouldn't have had on my own. So
right.
lets me live someone else's life or the author's experiences or have their knowledge. So I think it's a trip. You get to see new places.
So you don't lend books to friends.
I do, but then if I don't get it back, I buy the book again just because I like to have the
really
collection.
Nice of you.
Yeah,
you don't go that tip.
No, and then I just never lend them a book again.
Right.
But no, for me, books are one of those things. Like Marie Kondo, sure. Like I followed her decluttering thing until she got to books, and I was like, no, we're off. I'm not getting rid of my books. So I still have all my books, and I think they're my most prized possessions because every one of the words on all of those pages forms part of my ideas and part of who I am. Yeah. So, and I think about that when I think about media and I think about Instagram and I think about social media. If I think of all those books and those have all put things into my mind, so is the garbage that's on television and on social media. So I want to tell people that I think if you're seeing things routinely on media that make you feel less than, get rid of it. Right? Like if I had a book that I read that made me feel like garbage, I would throw that book away. You wouldn't read it again. I would not read it again, and I wouldn't let it live in my head.
And like you said earlier, you have to take ownership of your own state. Just because the news is always talking about negative things, it doesn't mean you have to listen.
No.
And it is crazy how it literally shapes, how your perception shapes your reality. If I was telling Katie the other day that I firmly believe that 99.99999% of people are good people, and that in fact there are so few that are not good people that we most likely don't know anybody that falls in there. And Katie's like, and like I just have this. I find that by focusing on the positive, it is literally as if the negative disappeared.
Well, what you feed grows.
Totally.
Right? So, I mean, there's that two-wolf thing, right? Yeah. Everyone's got the two wolves.
Which one wins? The one you feed, right?
The one you feed. And I think that goes with every aspect of your life. If you want to believe you can't do something, well, then you're sure never going to do it.
Right.
I think it's really about being accountable for yourself and saying, look, I'm responsible for the decisions I make, which lead to the outcome I have. And we were talking before we started the podcast that I am a firm believer of the statement, you were always one decision away from a completely different life.
Totally.
Like I could decide tomorrow to close my firm, quit my job, and make cakes.
Right.
And I would have a totally different life.
Yeah.
And there's nothing stopping me from doing that other than my want to do it.
Right.
So once you decide what you want, and I think that's the piece that people aren't comfortable with. They're not comfortable sitting with themselves and saying, what do you want? What is it that drives you? What is your motivation? Right. And what is it going to take to get you there? Because people don't want to have that hard conversation, because once you admit what you want, you got to take that next step and make the plan, or else now you know and you're living without. So I think that's that first step of deciding, what do you want your life to look like? Who do you want in your life? And then building that kind of life for yourself.
And at least, if that is really scary, what you can always do is you can think about the things that you certainly do not want more of.
Yes.
Right? So if you have friends that are negative, if you have, I don't know, relationships that are toxic, if the news puts you on edge, if reading scary stories makes you have nightmares, just eliminate that. Stop consuming that.
Well, and I think, or consume it in moderation. Like, it's the same kind of thing with food.
Like French fries.
Yeah, like French fries. You can have once
in a while. They're delicious,
but not every day.
Yeah.
I think that you have to really pay attention to what makes you feel good and what doesn't make you feel good. And having that understanding and, that self-awareness, and it's actually asking yourself those hard questions that people don't want to ask. Like, I finally said to myself, why aren't you a member of a gym? And the answer was, it wasn't, I can't afford it. It wasn't, I don't have time for it, because you make time for things that are important.
Right.
It was, I wasn't choosing to make myself important enough to invest the money or the time in. And how stupid is that? How stupid is it not to invest in your own self when that's literally at the end of the day You come into this world alone, you leave the world alone. It's what you put in the middle that matters.
Yeah.
And if you're not going to focus on yourself and, what's the cheesy line? Make yourself the star of your own movie.
Yeah.
Then what's the point, right? What's the point?
It's, I think that this conversation basically boils down to the responsibility that you have first with yourself and with your state, and when taking care of your mindset and your environment and what you allow into that environment, so that then you can take responsibility for a much bigger piece than just yourself, right? Go out there and have an impact. And
removing external validation. So I think a lot of people confuse support and external validation. So if I've made a choice to do something, for example, I'm going to eat better, I'm going to take better care of myself, that's a decision I've made.
Right.
Support is my friends being like, hey, how was your workout at the gym? Did you have a good time this week? Did you have good workouts? That's one thing.
Right.
External validation is, oh, good job. I see you're losing weight. You must really like the gym.
Right.
So if you need that piece where there's someone telling you, good job, way to go.
They haven't noticed. I guess I got to do more cardio.
Or maybe I should quit because it doesn't matter anyway.
Right.
Because when you're as big as I am, you can lose 30, 40 pounds and nobody notices.
Right.
Because you're still a big person.
Right.
So you have to really let go of that external validation piece and focus on the support piece and find people who know how to do that, or tell people what you need. Because I think that's another piece that we don't do, is tell people how to support you.
Expectations aren't, unspoken expectations are not agreements.
No, they're not.
Like, just because you expect me to be...
No truer words.
Come on.
No truer words. I mean, I should have that cross-stitched on a sampler. Hey, Katie, that's when you can
that's what Katie
for hanging in my office, right? Because, I mean, that's exactly the number one thing that leads to people's unhappiness, is that they think everyone knows what they need and what they want, and they don't.
And it's actually, you're doing yourself a favor if you are clear with your expectations.
And I mean, I think I'm a pretty effective communicator because I do it for work, but I find that in my own interpersonal relationships, like a friend of mine and I had a really big kind of blowout fight the other day. And it was really because neither one of us was actually communicating effectively what was going on in either one of our lives. And it just led to this like kind of pissy little argument over text message, which is gross. Like someone you care about who's your friend that you end up just sending like kind of snipey messages to. Yeah, kind of, and they were like kind of like attitudinal on that. And it didn't go well. And it makes you realize that even people who are really close and really care about each other, who are good communicators normally,
you know why? Because we are, it's human default to see things from our perspective and to just not put ourselves into somebody else's shoes.
And to be defensive.
Yeah. Right? Well, our little egos get in the way, and then
our little egos.
We
all have very big.
Well,
egos.
they want to pretend that they're big, but they're actually tiny and babies, and that's why that's why they kick and scream. I can't remember at one point, Katie and I were. With how busy things were getting and what have you, she felt like I was maybe not spending so much time with her. I felt like she wasn't supporting me, and this is a while back. And I found a picture that I shared with her, and it was of a man that is laying at top of a cliff, and he's got his arm down like this, and he's holding his wife, and on the wall of the cliff, there's a snake that is actually biting the woman's arm, right? Yeah. And on top of the guy, there's a boulder. There's a huge rock. She can't see the rock, and he can't see the snake, and they're both hurting, right? And it's so powerful to just communication.
And just to take a step back and take a step out of your own perspective. And I think that's something that we often get defensive, and we often want to blame other people because it's easier than being accountable.
Yes.
So to stop and say like, I'm sorry, but I'm feeling this way. That's a really hard step for a lot of people because it's easier just to be.
You did this. You made me feel.
You made me feel, and that's my favorite because feelings are actually your own.
Right.
No one can make you feel anything.
Right.
You feel, and you can say to people, when you behave this way, I feel this way, but they're not making you feel anything.
They didn't reach in there and
nope. There's nothing they can do with that. So. Emotions are self-imposed, feelings are self-imposed, and I think it's about communicating about the other person's behavior and actually being able to isolate what it is, because I think that's even harder to say. What about my behavior is also damaging my life? What about my behavior is causing me to have bad feelings?
Right.
That's the next level of that, right?
How would you suggest that maybe some of our viewers, if they feel that they just don't have that awareness yet and they want to develop it, what would you say would be a good resource, a good place to start, a good practice?
There was a judge who said there's no one in this courtroom today that couldn't benefit from some therapy, myself and counsel included. And that really rang true for me, because I think learning to talk about your feelings is really hard. And it's something that if you didn't grow up in a household where people did that openly, where it was safe to do that, or where it was even practiced, you might not have those skills.
Right.
And there are people whose sole jobs it is, like the plumbers. Their job is to dig the shit out of your emotions, and they're trained and qualified to listen.
Yeah.
So I think for people who haven't tried that, that might be a really great place to start, or just start talking about your feelings, or journaling. A lot of people find journaling really helpful. Just put it out there and practice. Like anything, like any muscle, it's a learned skill. You build that skill, you build that muscle, and then you end up being able to do it better and better the more you practice it.
Yeah.
So I think with anything, you just have to try it, and it's uncomfortable. And I think people shy away from things that are uncomfortable. That's a pretty safe statement. And I think for the most part, we don't want to do the things that are hard and uncomfortable.
But
they're
you
the ones that are good
choose
for us.
the pain that
You pick your suffering. Yeah, you pick what you suffer for.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Erin.
This
was
was
great. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for
Thanks.
listening. We will say just thank you so much to Erin, and we'll see you guys soon.
See ya.
Thank you.